While in London in the early 1980s, the unnamed narrator recounts stories and memories to his cousin Isla and his uncle Roby. The stories belong to the narrator, his uncle Tridib, and his grandmother, the MMA. The memories begin in the early 20th century when Tridib's grandfather, Mr. Justice Chandrasekhar Dutta Chowdhury, befriends Lionel Trissausen at seances in London. The MMA was born in 1902 in Dhaka, British India. As a young girl, the MMA's father and her uncle, Jathamashai, begin feuding, so they split their huge communal house in half with a wall. The two sides of the family stop speaking to each other. The MMA tells her younger sister, Maya Devi, that Jathamashai's family lives in the upside-down house, where they do everything upside down and backwards. After the MMA and Maya Devi marry, they lose contact with Jathamashai. The MMA follows her husband as he works on the railroad until he dies in 1936. At this point, her son, the narrator's father, is still a child. The MMA becomes a teacher and refuses to accept help from her family. Though the MMA had been interested in the movements against British rule in her youth, when the partition happens in 1947, it means little to her. She never returns to Dhaka since it becomes the capital of East Pakistan. The Shaheb is a wealthy diplomat, and in 1939, he needs a special medical operation that can't be performed in India. Mrs. Price, Lionel Trissausen's daughter, invites the Shaheb and his family to live with her in London. Tridib, who is 9 years old, accompanies his father, while his older brother, Jatin, stays in school in India. Tridib loves London and is fascinated by Alan Trissausen, Mrs. Price's brother, and his friends. In the time leading up to World War II and the early days of the Blitz, Tridib spends his days exploring bomb sites and listening to Snipe, Mrs. Price's husband, tell stories. In 1940, a bomb hits Alan's house on Brick Lane, killing him and Dan. Later that year, Tridib's family returns to India. Over the next decade, Maya Devi and the Shaheb have a third son, Roby. The narrator's father marries the narrator's mother, who soon gives birth to a son, the narrator. Jatin marries a woman affectionately known as Queen Victoria, and the couple has a daughter named Isla, who is the narrator's age. Mrs. Price, whose daughter May was an infant when Tridib was in London, has a son named Nick. Isla's parents are wealthy, and she spends her childhood traveling around the world for her father's work. The narrator, on the other hand, never gets far outside of Calcutta, spending time listening to Tridib's stories about London and other lands. Tridib teaches the narrator to use his imagination, explaining that the world in one's imagination can be as real as the outside world. Isla doesn't understand this, seeing too much of the world to appreciate the power of imagination. For a time, Isla's family lives with the Prices in London. When she's 8, her family visits Calcutta for a festival. The narrator convinces the MMA to allow his family to accompany Isla's to their family home in Rabajar. When they meet Isla's family in Gold Park, the narrator's mother is shocked that the narrator, who spent weeks asking after Isla, is too shy to talk to her. The narrator feels betrayed by his mother for revealing his need for Isla. The family piles into the Shaheb's 2 cars and drives for hours. When they reach the massive house, Isla leads the narrator into a half-underground storage room, which stores a massive table shipped from London. Isla decides they're going to play a game called Houses, which she plays with Nick in London. She informs the narrator of who Nick is, and he understands that Nick is his competition for Isla's affection. Isla draws a map in the dust of Mrs. Price's house and adds a room for Magda, her doll, who is the baby for the game. Isla tells the narrator what happened to Magda at school that day, involving a bully and Nick's heroics. When Isla starts to cry, the narrator is angry and doesn't understand why she's crying. Finally, Tridib walks in with the children and listens to the narrator tell Isla's story. Tridib encourages the narrator not to call Isla dumb for crying like the story is real, insisting that everyone lives in stories. Jatin marries a woman. In 1959, Tridib and May, who is 19 at the time, begin writing to each other. They exchange photos after a year. In 1963, Tridib sends May a very long letter recalling an experience he had as a boy in London when he watched two strangers have sex in a bombed cinema. He tells May that he wants to meet her like those strangers did, as strangers in a ruin. May is flustered, but she makes plans to visit Tridib in India. Around the same time, the MMA, who is retired and has time on her hands for the first time in her life, receives word that her uncle Jathamashai, who is in his 90s, still lives in the family home in Dhaka. She believes that it's her duty to bring Jathamashai home to India. Not long after this comes to light, the Shaheb receives a job posting in Dhaka, and he, Mayadevi, and Robi move there. Finally, Mayadevi invites the MMA to visit, and they make plans to try to save their uncle from the growing unrest in the Muslim-majority city. May makes plans to travel to Calcutta and then to Dhaka with the MMA. Tridib decides to accompany them to Dhaka. The narrator joins Tridib and his father to pick May up from the train station. Over the next few days, the narrator accompanies Tridib and May as they drive around and see the sights. He shows her the table in Ray Bajar, and she tells him that Isla was a victim of bullying, but Nick never saved her. When they visit the Victoria Memorial, May becomes suddenly emotional. Tridib tells her that it's their ruin, which puzzles the narrator. He understands that there's a relationship between May and Tridib that he won't understand. Not long after that, on January 4th, 1964, Tridib, May, and the MMA leave for Dhaka. A few days later, the narrator experiences a harrowing bus ride home from school as the driver tries to protect the dozen boys from the angry mobs in the streets. Meanwhile, in Dhaka, the Shaheb warns Mayadevi and the MMA that trouble is brewing there, but the MMA insists on seeing Jathamashai anyway. 13-year-old Robi is excited to see trouble and goes with them to the old house in Dhaka. There, a Muslim mechanic named Safuddin greets them and explains that a rickshaw driver named Khalil cares for Jathamashai. When Khalil arrives, he leads his guests into the house. Jathamashai doesn't recognize his nieces, but he tells Tridib that he's waiting for his family to return so that he can take them to court and gain full ownership of the house. The driver races to the door and says that there's trouble, and they have to leave. Khalil agrees to drive Jathamashai in his rickshaw to Mayadevi's house. When they're in the car, they turn a corner and come face to face with a mob. It surrounds the car and breaks the windshield. When the mob descends on the rickshaw, the MMA tells the driver to go, but May gets out to try to save Jathamashai. Tridib follows her, but Tridib, Jathamashai, and Khalil are all brutally murdered by the mob. The narrator's parents tell him later that Tridib died in an accident. The following year, the MMA gives her beloved gold chain away to fund the war with Pakistan and appears crazy to the narrator. His mother explains that the MMA hasn't been the same since they killed Tridib. In college, the narrator continues to both love Isla and find her frustrating, as she never understands why he is so insistent on remembering Tridib's stories. Once, during a summer holiday, she convinces the narrator and Robi to go with her to a nightclub. Robi doesn't want to go, but at the club, he forbids Isla from dancing with another man. She screams at them that she lives in London, so she can be free of this kind of oppression. The narrator tells this story to the MMA on her deathbed, and it makes her extremely angry. She doesn't think Isla's kind of freedom is real. In her anger, the MMA writes a letter to the dean of the narrator's school the day before she dies, telling the dean that the narrator visits prostitutes and should therefore be expelled. Back in London a few years later, Isla marries Nick. At their party, the narrator gets very drunk and May offers to take him home and put him to bed. The narrator assaults May but feels horrible about it in the morning. She takes him with her while she collects money for her worthy causes, and on a break, she talks about her relationship with Tridib. As the narrator prepares to return home a few months later, Isla confides in him that Nick is cheating on her, though she refuses to leave him. The night before the narrator leaves, he has dinner with May. At dinner, May tells the narrator about the riots and asks if he thinks that she killed Tridib. May tells him that she used to think she did, but she knows now that Tridib sacrificed himself and knew he was going to die. She asks the narrator to stay the night, and he accepts, glad to finally understand the mystery of Tridib's death. Back in London a few years later,